Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar today. So pleased you could join us. We'll be talking about how data leaders can secure investment for their data and AI initiatives today. You've got two hosts for today's session. You've got myself, Sophie Swift. I'm a client partnerships manager here for Cynozure, but today I'll be moderating our chat, answering any questions that you might have. And we also have Jason Foster, who is the CEO of Cynozure. Giving you a little wave there. You might know his face if you follow him on LinkedIn. He'll be talking us through today's presentation and giving us some practical takeaways and frameworks that we hope everybody joining today will be able to implement in their organisations. I've got a tiny bit of housekeeping before we dive into today's content. I'm sure you're very used to these webinars by now. We would love to hear from you. Perhaps tell us where you're dialing in from, share with us any insights, comments as we go through the session today in the chat. And you've also got the Q&A function. If you have questions, we have incorporated time to ask Jason questions about what he's presenting into today's format. And we actually have a couple questions for you as well. So it'd be great to hear from you. Wherever you are, I see a couple people from a not so sunny Cumbria. Great to have you here. Okay, then, a little bit about us at Cynozure. We are a data and AI company, helping organisations to achieve tangible business outcomes from their data and AI investments. Our work falls across the full data and AI spectrum, so anything from strategy to the people, processes and culture behind that, all the way through to the technology, the engineering and the AI that makes that happen. So you can see that the nature of our work is quite varied, but the one thing that underpins all of it is making sure that the organisations that we work with see real outcomes that support operational excellence, commercial excellence across their business. And we'll dive into that into a lot more detail today. We do this for a broad range of clients. Some of them you'll see on the screen now. And you'll notice that there's also a broad range of industries represented there. The way that we work with clients obviously gives us a lot of experience and insight into so many different sectors out there. But it also shows us that whilst there are nuances behind and between how these different industries operate, there are also so many common challenges, common opportunities for data and AI. And it just is a really good opportunity for us to bring that to the forefront and talk about some of these challenges and opportunities for data that we see and that you've told us that you've seen as data and AI leaders yourselves. One of the challenges that we've heard lots about over the last couple of months is the need to secure investment for data and AI. And how can we do this successfully and land business cases with exec teams that help them to have confidence in the investments that we are putting into the projects we want to launch. We've designed today's session as a practical playbook, hoping to give you lots of actionable tips and takeaways that are going to help you to land your next business case, whether that's with an exec leadership team, your own data and AI leader, or something you've got in the pipeline for the next 6 to 12 months. I think that's a great place to say over to you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sophie, and thanks everyone for being here. Absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Can see in the chat from all sorts of places across the country, mostly miserable, damp and wet in terms of the weather, and very British of everyone to talk about the weather, which is excellent. It's the same here in Hertfordshire. So absolute pleasure. Looking forward to talking about this. As Sophie says, one of the biggest challenges we saw in our recent survey and report that we put out was people's and organizations' ability to secure the investment that they need for data and AI. And there's lots of reasons for that, and I'll come to that. We also anecdotally talk to many business leaders, data leaders who are looking to find ways to make sure they start, scale their data and AI capability at pace. And to do that, obviously, they need budgets, they need funding, they need approval. And often they're falling short. And there's some really consistent stories that we hear and see. We're often asked to review data strategies that have been put forward that don't get approved alongside business cases. And there's a really interesting thread about why this keeps showing up. So hopefully today we can share some of the insight into that, some of the reasons that happens, and how to start thinking about things a little bit differently that really try to drive the agenda a little bit more sharply inside organizations. So I guess a bit of context to start. Academically and conceptually, at least, the value of data and AI isn't really in question inside organizations anymore. 10 years ago, even maybe 5 years ago, there was a lot of work required to get the topic of data and AI into the organization, into the leadership teams, into people's hands so that they can understand what it was about. And there's a lot of convincing needed. But just generally, there's an understanding that data and AI plays a part in an organization and can do. AI particularly has hit the boardroom in a way that we haven't really seen before, possibly maybe something like GDPR previously, which drove quite a lot of attention in the boardroom for data work, particularly around sort of customer and employee data, of course, in the case of GDPR. But AI has really sort of lit up the boardroom in a way that we haven't really seen before. And companies have been at this stuff for quite a long time. They've been, building capabilities, investing in platforms, trying to fix data, training up people in the organization, building things and building things with the aspiration of delivering value. So conceptually, it's sort of been there. There's been this understanding that data and AI can play a part. There has been budget given to drive change into an organization with an aspiration of some kind of impact. But what we see is that time and time again, there's a sort of difference between this high expectation and what we end up with. So money is spent, budgets are approved, but there's often very little to show, or certainly really tangible things to identify, and can draw a sort of direct line between investment and impact that comes about. Spend then becomes under scrutiny a lot more. CEOs and leadership teams and boards are questioning the commercial impact of the high promise, the high expectation that they have. And there's much more pressure growing on expectation around return from the work that you do, the investments you make in data and AI. So we've got this sort of like strange situation where there's a high expectation, investments have been made, but impact is missing. And impact is where we start to win. And we think, and we've seen over and over again, that in order to improve this situation, something needs to change. And we've got to stop focusing on building things, building capabilities, and instead focus on the impact and focus on the outcome that we're trying to achieve, on the tangible things that can actually move the needle forward. Now, this isn't to say that there isn't any building left to do, but it's about a mindset. It's about a shift in where the line of focus, where the line of attention, where the operating model lends itself and focuses on in order to deliver impact. And if I sort of put an analogy around this, if we're building a house, we want to build a home. We want to build a home that's thriving. It's got a family that is fulfilled, living a life they want to live, rather than an empty tower block that doesn't have any residents. So we're trying to create some impact. We're trying to invest in the right things, and we're trying to do that in a way that's really positive to the outcomes that we want to achieve. So the promise from data and AI can be quite big. It can improve, businesses generally. It can improve people's lives. It can improve society. It can improve health. It can solve problems. It can create opportunity. It can innovate. It can help innovate. Both data and AI can do that. But the consequence, because of that sort of expectation, that opportunity is so high, the consequence of getting it wrong can be quite stark. It can be, data and AI can be seen as a, as a cost center, rather than being something that really as an engine that can drive performance. It can create sort of slow and unsupported and poor decision making. And we've got this promise of data helping to create better decisions, and that doesn't happen often. It can slow things down. Your competitors who do get good at this can accelerate much quicker because they're able to automate, they're able to get precision into their system, they're able to get speed into their system. Costs can inflate. So if we don't invest smartly and in the right things, costs can inflate, and you often get this transformation fatigue as well. We're constantly trying to invest in making things better. And in the worst case, actually, confidence in data and AI strategy can collapse. And we've seen this happen time and time again. And from a personal perspective, individuals in roles that are trying to drive strategy forward, people can lose jobs because they're not showing the return, even if it exists, to be honest, if they're not showing the return, or they're not getting budget approved. So the downsides can be big. And we've seen this play out a number of times, and hence this conversation. And some of the rhetoric you might see in the sort of data and AI community sort of press, if you like. And it usually means and usually starts with the challenge of getting investment approved. The ones that get this right really do something differently. The gap that I've talked about there between the expectation, the opportunity, if you like, and the costs that are spent, this ROI gap that exists is a big challenge, and that is closed by the ones that do this really well. Business cases don't get approved often. The ones that do this well get business cases approved for the right things, and the results follow. And when we switch from this mode of being a cost center, a back office capability, to being something that's really driving the P&L or driving the outcomes or driving the impact in the organization, either strategically or operationally, we close this gap, we get measurable results, we reverse this kind of feeling that data and AI is sort of something that can support others do well in business and not something that really is an engine for business performance and business approval. So we're bringing it to sort of the conversation of business cases, what that often means and what we see happen and sort of where this context plays out is when you're submitting a business case. So you'll all have a different mechanism for doing this, of how you put a business case together. There'll be either be a very formal process for it, where you have to, submit documents, you have to galvanize opinion, all this kind of thing. But what we see is sort of four kind of types of business cases that all manifest in what I've just talked about. So things I've just talked about, manifest themselves in the way business cases are put forward. So the first we see, and this is one of the most regular that we see, is the technology pitch. So data and AI, trying to get some investment for driving some impact in the organization, for delivering some real positive momentum. But the business case is focused and centered on the costs associated with implementing some technology. And focusing on, building out a Databricks platform or a AWS cloud-based environment or some integration tooling or whatever it might be that's required, end-to-end technology stack, lakehouses, platforms, machine learning, all this sort of stuff. And they fail because there's more to it than technology. And they fail because the costs associated with technology can be quite high. So if there's no upside associated with that technology investment, it can be a limiting factor. The second is a capability argument, so similar to technology, but focused on sort of broad capabilities. We need to improve how we do data governance. We need to get better at data management. We need to train our people to improve how they use data to help drive their decision making. It's all driven around building strong capability, which is needed, but again, misses and has a gap between why. Why do we need this capability? What does it deliver for us? The third is the long-term promise, and often it's, well, if we invest now, then other people can get some value. If we data team or we technology team or we central team building our data capability invest this money, then our supply chain team, our marketing team, our finance team, our customer team, over time will be able to improve what they do. It's in the future some time, so over the next 2 years we need to invest, and then value can be delivered at a later date. It's sort of a bit of a promise. There's a big leap of faith required from people looking at business cases. And the third, which is sort of positive in some ways, it's because it's about ROI, it's about the return that we get. It's a little bit of a vanity ROI play. So it focuses on kind of big numbers, maybe generic, if we improve by 2%, then this can happen. But there's either no assumptions built in, or it's built in very weak assumptions, or it's based on, say, the latest Gartner report that says people who invest in data can get 2 to 5% improvement. So it's quite general. It's about ROI, great, but it's very generic and it's very focused on big vanity numbers that people struggle to get behind. So that's the sort of context. We've got this kind of big picture. We're trying to improve the world. We don't quite get right in terms of how we position and how we focus our attention for making sure we get budget and business cases approved. So that I just wanted to pause there and let Soph sort of check in with you and see how that resonates.
Brilliant, thank you. I suspect there'll be people in the room that have maybe seen that situation play out, can perhaps relate to one of those four types of four. Some people saying they've seen all four. There's no prize for the bingo on that one, I'm afraid, but I think that's probably very common that people have seen all four play out. If if you want to ask Jason a question at this point, welcome to do so. Jason, one that springs to mind is, how does this play out with other members of the leadership team? Because surely when they're looking at a business case from a data or an AI function, and they can't see where the value is, like what do you think they should be looking for or could be doing to help, the other people on the receiving end of that business case?
Yeah, the I've got some slides actually that cover sort of how to go about changing this situation, but it's a really good question about sort of how this is perceived across the leadership team or exec or board, whatever, depending on your organization, whatever that senior group often is who are signing off budgets. Is what you're trying to do is land a message, and you're trying to get people on board, and you're trying to prove that it's worth spending some money. And I see big frustration from people asking for money when it can go 2, 3, 4 times back to try and sort of sharpen the message and the story. And there's some real frustration that they just don't get it. And they just don't get it because they can't connect the dots between what they care about and what the ask is. So if we're purely asking for some technology and then sort of trying to reverse engineer some, reasons, it falls flat for most of the room. If we're focusing it very specifically in one area, you alienate a lot of people. If you focus purely on capabilities, I think people naturally know that if we're better at things, we'll get better at them. There's sort of a natural feeling, but it's quite a big leap of faith. So I do think, there's a real challenge where you can alienate, you can sort of almost lose credibility in those conversations when you don't quite get that right.
Yeah. And I've got some great
Cool.
comments in the chat on this,
Yeah,
so it's obviously resonating.
Yeah, this point here about years ago of data science. I think and whether this is the same with AI. I actually think this has never really gone away. I just don't think we've ever got brilliant at it generally across the board. And whether it's data science or it's AI or it was big data as well at some point, or something, agentics, that something that's now we're talking to clients about. The same is true. All of what I'm about to say and all of the challenge that I've talked about, the same is true. And we've got to find a way of putting data and AI on the front foot. And that's nice segue into the next conversation.
Perfect.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. We'll come back to you shortly at the end of this section, where I just want to talk about how we start to think about that differently. And then I've got some a section later on sort of turning that into a little bit more practical. So if the problem statement here is that we create inadvertently or on purpose create this gap between expectation and what we're asking for, we need to find a different way of articulating the problem statement. Now, you all would have seen your version or had your version or filled in your version. I feel sorry for you. I've been there myself, of some kind of business case template, which is sort of you're steered to this route of very low level detail of putting in the costs of all those sorts of, this is just for template from online. You'll have your own version, but very cost and capability focused business case templates, and actually not really business case at all. They're investment asks. They're investment ask templates, where they're saying how much money do you need, and often it doesn't come with the and what return. And we've just talked about there is ways of identifying that return, and sometimes that's a bit vanity and sometimes a bit generic, and so that might exist, but we've got to find a different way of doing this. And as with many things in the sort of this space, a better way of telling the story is sort of something we need to think about here. So one of the things that we found works really well and positions all of this in the way that's sort of opposite what I talked about being the problem statement before, is reframing the ask as an investment rather than the costs. So costs and investment are the same, but investment suggests there's some return rather than just costs that doesn't necessarily suggest anything. You've got run rate costs that don't necessarily generate a return, you just have to have them. But investment feels like something you're investing to get something back, whether that's CapEx or OpEx. And also show the impact. And this kind of thinking of this through left to right, as you see on the screen, of what problem are we looking to solve? What decision can we make to improve that problem? What outcome are we looking for, and what impact can we make? Then we can talk about, well, what investment do we need in order to create that impact that gets to that outcome, that helps us make that decision to drive that problem statement through. So in one very quick way, yes, we still might need to fill in the spreadsheet, but in one very quick way, we're changing the ask from saying, here's a bunch of things I need to spend money on, people and technology and change and transformation programs and recruitment, to here are some problems that the organization has, probably, hopefully, definitely aligned to either the strategic objectives or the operational challenges that exist in the business, or the noise that is happening around the organization because we constantly, deliver things to the wrong place, or we get a lot of customer complaints in a certain area. Whatever the problem statement might be, however strategic or operational, linking that through to, well, if we fix that problem, here's how big that impact can be. That's a very sharp way. And so to Soph's question to me before, actually, about how do we, deal with this situation of other members of the leadership team or board that are sort of listening to this stuff, how do we get them engaged and involved and interested? This is the answer to that. We're showing them how data and AI is about solving problems. We're showing them that data and AI is about helping improve how we make decisions, driving outcomes, and ultimately creating the impact. Now, people want to know what they are. And as I say, there's different grains of this. There's very strategic and top level about, launching into new markets, or releasing a new product set, or getting a new customer base, to very operational problems like payments or deliveries, or, issues with HR performance, or whatever the problem statement might be. But if we can articulate it in this way, we can start to tell a story in business terms that people understand and people care about. So as an example, we might have a situation where the way we're doing pricing is confusing for people. We've got too many different price points for too many different products. It's too complicated. We're hearing noise from customers that it's confusing them. We're getting lost revenue because people aren't buying things because they're not sure whether they should buy at full price, at the discounted rate, whether they're going to wait till the sale. So they might have a whole bunch of problems around pricing. So the decision we want to make is, how do we optimize our prices so that they generate the best return, whether that, we get people to buy, we get people to check out quicker, we get people to renew their contract, whatever the pricing mechanism might be in this scenario. And if we do that, we can improve our margin. So this could say increase revenue. This could say get more customers. This could say have better conversion rate. But in this example, it will improve our margin because we'll sell more at the right price based on the cost to deliver that service or product. And the impact, back to this slide, will be £10 million. So we haven't spoken about data or AI yet. This is purely the business story that exists in the organization. This is a problem that we should probably solve. This is a thing people care about. This is a challenge that gets talked about in every team meeting and every board meeting. When we look at the monthly trading report, whatever it might be, this is a problem that exists in the organization. It's not something that would have been made up. Obviously, this is a made up example, but it helps to frame the conversation as something that's going to deliver impact. Now, as I said, this isn't anything to do with data and AI at this point, but of course there will be some data and AI things we need to do in order for us to be able to deliver this, and that's the investment. So what we can then articulate is, well, what's the cost, what's the investment we need to make in order to deliver that impact? So in my made up example, we've got to spend some money on tech, we've got to build some models, we've got to build some insights so that people can see the better pricing and how to allocate them across our customers or contracts, however we do it. We've got to do some training, and the total cost of that is just over £1 million. So we've got a £1 million investment, which if we ignored that top row of pricing and margin and 10 million, then that would just be an ask for £1 million. That'll be cost. That'll be money that we need to spend. But if we frame it in context of, well, to get the 10 million, we need to spend one, that's a much more compelling case for spending the one than purely seeing the one on its own. Now, that sounds really obvious when you frame it this way, but what we see very often is that often you just get this table at the bottom going into a business case or into a data strategy or a pack that goes to investment committees. And obviously the problem with that is it's on its own, it's not contextual. On its own, it doesn't really add a huge amount to the conversation. It's just an ask for some money. And all good things that you need to buy and spend money on probably, but it doesn't link to anything specific. So this way we're linking it to something specific. So the first sort of headlines point really here is reframe the money that you want to spend as an investment and show it directly next to the impact that it will make. That's what we want to do more times than we don't. Now, of course, there are some investments that you need to make that are, multi-problem statement solving. There are some foundational things that sometimes we need to invest in that don't on their own directly link line for line to a specific piece of outcome. But if we can package up the outcomes that we're looking to achieve and the investment we need to make alongside each other, you get a much better result. And we've done this quite a few times with customers. So just a few examples that just sort of help bring it to life. So we work with a leading storage and logistics business that came under quite a lot of pressure post COVID around kind of challenges with increased cost, with utilities prices going up, energy bills, economic pressure, all the things that came with that, people not using the service as much. And there was a mandate given to plug the margin gap that they started to see. So Cynozure were brought in to help the commercial team. It was actually quite similar to the example I gave, to build out a pricing model that analysed customer value versus the cost to serve, identify opportunities to shift the pricing for the renewals for all of their B2B and B2C customers that they had. And we simulated different pricing scenarios that enabled them to decide, instead of blanket renewal pricing across the board, they could allocate adjustments per customer to maximize the renewal, to maximize the margin of that renewal, to give discounts where they should, to increase prices where they should, to sack customers where they should, instead of this blanket model that they would have done before. And because they did that this year, the year that then finished, or the following year after they implemented these changes, they saw a 7.9% revenue increase that they put down to the way that they did pricing. Now, the work we did was build a data warehouse, build some models on top of the warehouse, do some modeling around pricing, build some dashboards so the commercial team could see different pricing and play around with different prices based on customers. So the work we did was all the investments that we need to make, and we trained them up on how to use Power BI and things like that. But the value of doing it was huge, and the opportunity to do it was huge, and the risk of not doing it was big. So the way we were able to show value going on the way in was to show how different pricing models can help drive up the revenue. And it was a much easier conversation for them to get budget approved to do the work. Another example, very different. This was for a charity. The work that we did, so if I tell this story the other way around, the work that we did was, in this case, to build a new data warehouse and migrate them off their old platform onto a new platform. But the value of doing it was they had some big challenges in the way that their old platform was set up that meant that they didn't pass some of the due diligence required to get some funding from the NHS. So the NHS wouldn't have funded them if they carried on with this model, and that they were running out of time before the bids needed to go in. So we helped them migrate their platform, build out a new modern data architecture. And because they did that, they were able to secure this 15 million funding that more than funded the work that we did, and a bunch of other work that they needed to do beyond that. Again, framed in the way of, in order to secure funding, £15 million is a great prize for the investment that they were looking to make. And then a similar story, an entertainment business. Again, work was the same. It was build out platforms, it was put in models, it was integrate with their CRM systems, it was sharing insights with marketing teams and commercial teams to help improve ticket prices. But the opportunity was about, how do we get more direct customers to buy from us direct rather than through the ticket agencies that are out there. It increased total sales by 11% through their own channels, and put the average up by 5%, and it created a much stronger connection with their customers and led to this 120% increase in ticket sales. So the positioning of the opportunity of increased ticket sales, better customer interaction, drove the investment that allowed them to get this result, rather than the other way around of just asking for the money because we wanted to build the capability or to invest in some technology. So.
Perfect. I think the examples really brought that to life. Thank you, Jason. There's quite a few comments actually in the chat where people have mentioned things like they've typically done like a capability style ask for investment in the past. So I think having the examples of like, well, what would the impact be like? Why do we want to get better at something? What's in it for the organisation in terms of operational commercial outcomes? One that stuck out as you were talking is, quite often there'll be a multi-problem statement, or there'll be multiple teams or multiple areas of impact that we can have. Would you separate those out or put them all as one business ask?
It depends, actually. I think when going for a business case approval, it very much depends if you're trying to get a whole data strategy approved, or whether you're trying to get some investment to develop a really specific use case. Now, a business case to develop a very specific use case is much easier. The example I showed was a very specific use case. Getting a data strategy approved, like a whole investment for a multi-year program, for example, um, just means that you need to be really clear on what the size of the prize is. And the size of the prize is usually the sum of all the opportunity that exists. But the trick is asking for money that gets you, to first base, asking for the investment that allows you to deliver a use case, some value, some outcome, rather than investing in money to sort of build out a long sort of horizontal foundational capability, switching it around and asking for money that allows you to deliver sort of vertically end to end, the infrastructure, the data, the modeling, the insights, the solving the problem, and then moving on to the next one. So sort of use case by use case rather than, cross foundational investments that at some point in the future might be able to lead you to some value.
Definitely. And I think this conversation forces us as, like, if we're a data leader, it forces us to look at, well, where is the impact outside of my team? A new warehouse is going to make me more efficient, make my team happier. It might save me some cost actually somewhere down the line,
Yeah.
looking at loads of legacy systems that I'm running. But actually, I need to be really clear on where the impact is in external teams and departments to help me get this landed.
Yeah, bro. And
Perfect.
I like
Thank you.
Oliver's comment in the chat as well about, challenging how you can map to the outcomes of the work that you're doing rather than either just capability or capacity. It's a really important point. So let's push on that a bit more. So we've talked sort of quite conceptually, I suppose, about how we need to reframe costs into investment, how we need to identify the impact, and to Oliver's point, actually, how we need to make sure that impact lines up to things that people care about. So, but we've got to do that in a efficient, sustainable way, and have an operating model and an approach and language that allows us to quantify the value, to embed the value in the way we work. So I'm going to introduce a phrase that we use with clients and that really helps to sort of bring this home, which is return on data investment, or RODI. And there's two sides of the equation, and again, these are going to be quite obvious when I say them, but it's not generally how it manifests itself. So on the right hand side of this RODI is the data investment. These are like the inputs, the commitments, the stuff you put in. These are the costs. So everyone's good at this stuff. They're really good at writing down, how much we're going to spend on technology, the investment, basically, how much recruitment we need to do, how much training program we need to implement. This is the cost sides of the equation. The return is therefore the outcome, the effect, the movement. If we spend the money, we get this return. And it is two sides of an equation. And obviously we want the return to be higher significantly, and in some cases the hurdle rate can be really high. I've heard 10x is not an unfamiliar hurdle rate for investment, and I think that sort of earns you the right to spend the money if you can show that. So on the right, resources and time and effort and tech and people and data assets and data products, and on the left, this return is the impact, the value, the commercial gain, the efficiency, and there's value buckets that return generally can fall against, and this isn't necessarily exhaustive. And if you're in a commercial business, this really should be P&L impact. If you're in a charitable, not-for-profit organization, social enterprise, then yes, P&L, but it's actually more about investment, making money to make investment and reinvest into the charitable work that you're doing. If it's public sector, it's obviously using money in a smart way. But these value buckets allow you to think about, well, what is the impact I'm trying to make? And of course, there's financial performance, things like revenue uplift, cost reduction, margin, reducing waste and leakage. There's efficiency, where we're better at things, we're more automated, it costs less to do things and less manual effort. A grayer one, but is one that can still be articulated in a really powerful way. And we've got a separate session we run where we dig into this one a little bit more, because it starts to be a bit wobbly when we talk about we're better at decision making, but it can be really effective and really powerful. Certainly an anecdotal set of value statements that sit alongside some of the more hard measures. Speed to action, which is really important, particularly if you're in a competitive market, getting to market quickly. So getting data solutions and insights and models that support that decision making to help speed things up is good. reducing risk and making your organization more resilient, that a really strong value bucket. And in some sectors like insurance, risk management is high on the agenda. Financial services very high on the agenda. Anything regulated is risk is and resilience is very high on the agenda. So it can be really powerful, really strong sort of value bucket to start putting things into. Experience improvement, so better for customers, better for staff, remove internal frustrations, these sorts of things, and then enabling strategic capability within the organization. Again, you can start to put some numbers on. So it's not about starting with these value buckets and going, right, which one do we think we can play with and levers can we pull, although it's a helpful thinking mechanism, to be honest, around that. But it is about saying, where in our organization does value exist? What's the size of the prize? What problems can we solve? What opportunities can we go after? How can we innovate? What do people care about? What will help improve lives for our customers, for our staff, and start to build out a picture of where the value does actually lie. But the real power in all of this comes from embedding, delivering value and focusing on RODI, as we call it, into the fabric of how you operate. And there's sort of 4 steps to think about here. There's intent, which is what is the opportunity? What outcome? These are all the value buckets I just talked about, and identifying up front the intent that we plan to deliver. And of course, we don't know if we're going to deliver the value until we do it. There are different ways of that through proving and POCs and these sorts of things. But what's our intent? What do we plan to try and deliver that we can articulate to people? This is the sales story, with genuine, assumptions baked in, but really explicit. Who owns the problem? Who's going to drive it? How does it link back to the strategy or the operations? The second step is then using that intent list to give us focus. What should and shouldn't we work on? Where should we invest our time, energy, and money? How should we prioritize the things that we're going to do? What are the trade-offs between the different things we could do? How do we remove duplication across the organization? How do we build once and use many? So we've got, where is the opportunity? Which of those things are we then going to do, which is apply the focus? Then we've got to do some things. We've got to build the platform. We've got to put a dashboard together. We've got to build a propensity model. We've got to put improve some data assets within our CRM system, like whatever the work is required to deliver on the intent. And then we need to track, and this is where it often falls down. So left-hand side, often people do okay or very well or not very well, but often it falls down, if we are good at the steps 1 and 2, in tracking the evidence, in writing, in going back and reviewing in various increments, what was the result? How well did we achieve? And knowing that we didn't achieve something is also really powerful, because you can switch it off and stop it, but capture the changes that happen, observe the returns, agree and approve those with finance, with the people that owned the value delivery. And it helps, if we do this, it helps build the credibility. It means that we learn from what we've done, and it means it gives us something to base decisions on in the future. Should we do those things again? Well, yes, if it delivered some value, maybe no, or let's do it differently if it didn't add value. And then use all of that to create a cumulative impact story. So we take all of the things we plan to do, all of the lessons we learn, all of the value that was delivered, and you roll that up to tell a story of, we invested this money to deliver these things, we delivered these things, and because we got 10x return, we can now afford rightly to invest further in more use cases, in more opportunity that exists, the rest of the intent list, which will always change. And this is more like a cycle, so it's not linear like this. It loops back around to step 1. But the whole point of this is to try and embed this idea of focusing on impact, back to my first slide, into the fabric of how we operate and how we move through the conversation. I'm going to skip this check-in just to kind of finish this piece, just conscious of time. And then what we need to think about is back to business cases again. So this sort of middle section there was a bit about how do we think about this, how do we reframe, how do we embed day to day? But of course, it brings back to, well, how do we then build a business case that lands? Now, all of the things I've talked about, you can sort of summarize into groundwork. We've got to change the way we think. We've got to change the way we articulate value. We've got to rethink how we talk about data and AI work with our peers and our stakeholders. We've got to talk to them about the opportunity. We've got to talk to them about how what it means to them. We've got to build up a picture and a story about what's worked before, what's gone well, how much value that's been delivered, so that when we land the business case on, in the investment committee, the people around the table understand and know and get the story. Now, I like to think of there's the formal sort of business case document, this one that I showed before, but there's also the story that you tell. And I was taught very early in my career actually by a brilliant transformation change leader about sort of softly landing the plane in the meeting. And you softly land the plane in the meeting by pre-approval essentially. And the pre-approval comes from talking to people and sharing the story. But what you then produce is essentially a pitch deck. And if you think about how a startup gets investment, for example, they create a pitch deck, and the pitch deck articulates the problem that exists in the world, the opportunity that presents, the solution that they've got on how it solves that problem, the investment they need, etc., etc. And we can think about it in the same way for the business case, and it sort of brings together the things I've talked about. So what's the opportunity? So either all the things that exist or one very specific thing like pricing at the example I gave before. What problem do we have in this is what this problem means here. What problem do we have in delivering that opportunity? And it might be that we don't have the tools, it might be we don't have the people, it might be we don't have the data, it might be we don't have the foundations, it might be that the data quality is poor. There'll be problems with us being able to improve pricing, for example. So there's a solution to that, and the solution is all the things that we need to do in order to help, in order to be able to deliver the business opportunity. And those things cost money, so there's investment, and that takes time to deliver. So it builds up the story in a way that talks about it in terms of business things. It shows where there's a gap in your ability to deliver that right now, and that there's work and time required to do it. Now, some Brucey bonuses that you can often include are if you've done some POC work ahead of asking for the money, which is always really helpful if you can prove some way what you're trying to achieve is achievable. So early traction, showing that can be really helpful. I talked about assumptions, so being really clear about what assumptions you've made or made and discounted, so everyone's clear going in. What the risks are, so you might have some risks in the investment, there might be risks in knowing whether something's possible. And particularly if you're early on in asking for money, early into the company or first time you go into investment committee or something like that, being really clear on the creds that the team has to show that this team are able to do this because of their previous experience or work they've done inside the organization before or for another team or somewhere else. So sometimes team creds can be really powerful way of doing this. So the business case becomes not only this horrible old spreadsheet that we have to fill in, but it also becomes a really powerful story that we get to tell. And if we tell it in the right way, we get to a yes for when we come to approval for investment.
Thank you, Jason. One thing that sprung to my mind there is you talked about that being a cycle rather than a linear process. Like if you were a CDO with projects in flight, what would you do on those projects now that would start talking about impact that would be delivered from them?
Yeah, I think anyone mid-flight that isn't clear on the value that the piece of work or the investment they're making now is due to deliver should take stock and a step back. And it might not be pull the plug and it might not be the handbrake, but finding a way of making sure it's really clear to them and other people what the point is. And we've seen major programs, millions of pounds get pulled because that question can't be answered. So before that question gets asked, and before the next investment round comes up where you want to ask for more, which is, every year that budget cycle comes around, being really clear on what you plan to deliver and articulating backwards what has been delivered. And even if even if that's not recognized, in finance, for example, and in P&L, even unrecognized anecdotal evidence is good as a starting point. Looking back, but looking forward, making sure it's upfront agreed and follows that sort of RODI cycle is the best way to just make sure that you keep on top of it going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who shared a comment or a question in the chat. Keep them coming. One thing that you can take away, I mean, if you're ready for a chat and you'd like to talk to someone at Cynozure about how we could help with this, very welcome to do so. We are always open for a conversation, as those of you who know us will know well by now. But one thing that you can try out today, completely free and gives you instant results, is our return on data investment scorecard. You can access it through the QR code that you've got on your screens. It will throw up some questions for you and just give you an idea of where you're sitting currently and some things you can do for improvement quickly in terms of showing measurable impact from the initiatives that you're launching in your own data and AI functions today. I think then, with that in mind, that was a really valuable session. Thank you so much, Jason, for sharing your insight. Thank you to everybody who joined us and participated and contributed. Loved hearing from you. And I wish you a fantastic rest of the day and hope to see you on a webinar again soon. Thanks,
everyone.